This week I finished the Emily Wilson translation of the Odyssey. This is from 2018, published by Norton. Nice paperback edition, deckled edges. Reminds me a little bit of a Penguin Classics Deluxe edition. I've heard a lot of buzz about this translation, not all of it positive. So I wanted to clear up some things, give you my personal take, my impressions on the translation, a brief review, and we'll let Emily Wilson speak for herself a little bit. I want to talk about some of the controversy about this, but also I want to heap a lot of praise because I like this translation. I thought it was really, really good read. I don't know what all the fuss is about, but let's try to clear up some matters here on Great Books, Big Ideas. Emily Wilson, 2018 translation. Who is Emily Wilson? Well, Emily Wilson is a professor of classical studies at the University of Pennsylvania. She lives in Philadelphia. She knows her stuff. She also has a Substack. So if you would like to follow her on there and see what she has to say about translation, she does talk a lot about translation and classical studies on that Substack blog. I encourage you to check it out. Let me first talk about my experiences with previous translations of the Odyssey. Some of this is very fuzzy. This is probably my fourth or fifth time reading the Odyssey. The first, I'm sure we covered it in 8th or 9th grade. I doubt we read the whole thing. I don't even remember vividly reading it. It might have been one of the prose translations. I remember seeing films that were dramatizing it, and these were sort of like old 1950s sword and sandals scenes, like the old like Hercules short films and all that kind of thing. It's very fuzzy. There might have been like some literary critic like Louis Untermeyer or one of those people who would kind of tell you what the book was about, and then they would depict some scenes. That's about all I remember from the first time through. But it was an intriguing story. The adventure plot aspect of the epic was memorable. But I don't know who the translator was for that. And then I read it next on my own in Great Books of the Western World, the Samuel Butler prose translation. I read it again. I think we read the whole thing in a college Continental Literature Survey course. That was one of these big anthologies. I don't have that anthology any longer. I do not remember who the translator was. I liked it, but I'm pretty sure it was a verse translation. But beyond that, I can't remember who the translator was. I really just don't know. And then many, many, many years later, I read the Robert Fagles verse translation, Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition. Still have that in the house. I loved it. That's my favorite overall translation of my read-throughs of the whole book. Like, that's my favorite. I think he did a wonderful job with it. And then just this year, I read this version by Emily Wilson, which I loved. I liked it a lot. I don't know why there's so much pushback about this translation, but maybe we'll dig into it and come up with some answers. So why is there so much noise about it? Well, I'm not exactly sure, but what I've come across, and I do not spend any time on social media like Twitter. I'm not there. I deleted my account like many, many, many years ago. I've always hated Twitter. I don't know what people are saying on Twitter. I don't see anyone talking about it on Facebook. I don't check Facebook all that much. I do see chatter about this translation on Substack. They have a notes feature on Substack, which is like their version of like a Twitter type short form space. And I don't really like the notes, but I do read them when I'm bored from time to time. That's about as far as I'll go. But what I've heard some things on YouTube, at BookTube, about it. So like what I gather the problem might be, and correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I'm in the shadows here. I'm really out of touch. But I feel like maybe people think this is some kind of like woke version of the Odyssey. And whenever I hear someone use the term woke, I get immediately suspicious of that person, because that to me is a label you can't really use anymore, because it tells so much more about the speaker, the user of the word woke, than anyone else. It's such a tell, and it tells me that this person is probably unserious. And I think to really render judgment on a translation, you really have to read the book. You have to read the whole translation. Oh, I just did a translation shootout of the Odyssey where I read the first page or so of the epic, comparing, what was it, about 5 or 6 translations that I have here in the house. And that was fun. It's a fun exercise. You get to do some comparing and contrasting, but it's really, you can't really render any kind of final judgment about a translation unless you've read the whole book. You have to be fair to the translator there. So I read the whole book. That's what I like to do. I like to read books, and then I have opinions about them. I have reactions. My reactions is this was a fine translation. My overall impressions of it were it was very fast paced. It's written in iambic pentameter blank verse, but effortlessly so. It didn't feel stilted or strained or sing-songy or awkward. That's a very natural meter choice for the English language. It's it flowed really well. It was a very lucid, plain spoken, which is, I think, some readers have a problem with that. Maybe a little too plain, a little too simplistic for its own good. You lose something, but it moves along. It's very well paced. It's very clear. It has clarity, lucidity. And for this modern age, in an age where fewer and fewer young people are reading books at all, I think you have to make some concessions to the state of affairs we find ourselves in. This is a book I could easily see being taught at a high school level or an undergraduate level, and I don't think student readers would immediately reject it as being archaic or, long in the tooth, antiquated, or stuffy. It's not stuffy at all. It's a page turner. It's great. Do I like it as much as the Fagles translation? I'd have to say no. I think this is a runner-up to that. But that is not, I'm not denigrating this translation. It has its merits. But I think overall, I really like the Fagles translation. There were certain areas of the book that I was thinking, like, Fagles maybe did this a little bit better. Like, for some reason, towards the end of the book, when Odysseus and Telemachus slay the suitors in the banquet hall, that is very well rendered in Fagles, as I remember it. It's gory, and you get a lot of vengeance satisfaction. You really want to see these suitors get their comeuppance, and Odysseus really delivers, and it's very violent. And in this version, it seemed it scooted through that a little faster, or it just didn't come down across as graphic. I mean, it's graphic enough, but there was a little shade of difference there that I picked up on. There were some stylistic missteps here and there, where maybe a modern colloquialism would creep in that felt a little off key. That's going to happen. And, I give Emily Wilson a pass. This is a hard job translating this old stuff for a modern readership, and she did the best she could. And overall, I think she did a great job. I think that the plot pacing was a strength of it. The clarity, you didn't feel ever like you were getting stuck on place names or names of gods or characters. They're all in there, but it didn't feel like you were getting stuck in the mud. It just keeps moving along. And the structure of the story, the episodic structure, was very well rendered. I don't see why anyone would really complain about this translation. I give it very high marks. I think it's worth your time. I think it's especially good for people who, a first timer, like you're new to Homer, you're maybe trepidatious, you're not sure. This one, is a good gateway. Like, just jump in, let the story carry you along on its current, and you will fall in love with the Odyssey, one of the greatest epic poems ever written. I don't think you should ever read a single translation in comparative literature. Like, you want to read it again in a different translation. That's why I have so many translations here in the house. I'm always open to reading another translation, and it enriches your experience of the text. We are all like in deficit here because I'm going to assume that about 99.99999% of us don't read ancient Greek. Now, I was a Latin major, took a second major in Latin in college. My first major was English. I always thought of myself primarily as an English major, but I did study Latin, and I had 4 semesters of ancient Greek, and read a tiny little bit of Homer in ancient Greek. I am in no position to judge like how good the translator is doing at translating the ancient Greek. If you've read Homer in the ancient Greek from start to finish, you are very well positioned to have a good opinion about how well the translator did their job. But a lot of us are kind of groping around in the dark and in the shadows. I mean, let's just be real about it. These are English translations. And one way I think that you can judge the worthiness of a translation in light of the fact that, we don't read ancient Greek is you have to compare. Like, you compare different translations, and you have certain tastes and proclivities, and then you're going to decide what works best for you. And what works best for me might not be what works best for you. But hey, it's a marketplace. Odysseus, the Odyssey is in multiple editions. Like, so many translations are at your fingertips. You've got libraries, you've got ebooks. You can go to town. There's no shortage of translations out there. This is not the one and only that replaces all the others. It's just one of the newest ones. And it has that going for it, because when you have a new translation, it sort of feels comfortable. It's like, oh, this is how we read and speak. Let's talk a little bit more about where maybe some of the controversy over this translation comes from. And I think it probably stems from Emily Wilson's introduction. She writes a long introduction to this book. I did a smart thing. Doesn't happen very often, but I didn't read the introduction. I just jumped right to page 1 of the epic and let the story carry me away. I recommend that that's how you read this translation. Skip the introduction. Don't worry about the introduction till you finish the book, and then you can go back and see, what it was all about, what her critical stance looks like, how she defends her choices as a translator. And after finishing the book, I did go back over to introduction and skimmed through it and looked and read a lot of it. And there's nothing wrong with it. But it's also where I think people might take some issue and have some disagreements. I thought her tone in the introduction, like, at times sounded maybe a little defensive. Maybe she was aware that there was going to be some pushback, and she's arguing her case. So that might have been off-putting to some readers. Some readers might think she's being a little overly sensitive to contemporary hot-button issues like gender and slavery and things like that. And but that's what people are talking about today. Like, why not consider it? All these themes and issues are swirling around the Odyssey anyway. I didn't, on close examination, I didn't really have a problem with the way that she talked about these things. But some people get all, they start clutching their pearls, and they get all in a lather about like the slightest little thing. I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense to me. The sections of her intro where she has the most focused she has a section on you could call these themes in the story: friends, neighbors, and guests. So that we'll start with that. So on page 23, hospitality is important in all human cultures, ancient and modern. In this respect, there is nothing special about archaic Greece. What is distinctive about the customs surrounding hospitality in this culture is that elite men who have entered one another's homes and have been entertained appropriately are understood to have created a bond of guest friendship, xenia, between their households that will continue into future generations. And she goes on and on and on. It's a long section. But you see, bringing up a term like xenophobia in 2018, given the current political climate, and what is the attitude towards immigrants, legal and illegal, homeless, the houseless, unsheltered, the guest workers. You can see why certain politicized readers might get their hackles up. And it's like, ooh, don't talk. But you know what? Hospitality is a major theme in the Odyssey. She is not off the mark even by a little bit. It's all through it. There's a lot of traveling that goes on. There's a lot of hosting. There's a whole range of receptivity choices, in how characters treat one another when a guest shows up on their shores, when a stranger shows up, when a beggar shows up. And, it makes a lot of sense to me why she leads a thematic overview with that theme of Xenia. Okay, it's also a section about gods, and then another section on goddesses, women, princesses, and slave girls. Let's see what she has to say here, because here again, this is something that might bother an overly sensitive reader of a certain persuasion. We know frustratingly little about the lives of women in archaic Greece. The Homeric poems themselves are rich sources of information about Mediterranean society in the 8th century BCE, although both are highly artificial literary texts and both were presumably created primarily by and for men. We see in the Iliad a world in which women were often treated by elite warrior men as if they were objects, prizes traded in war for men's honor, along with other possessions like bronze tripods and piles of treasure. But women also had their own distinctive work, and their own perspective on the male-dominated world of war. They fed, washed, and clothed the men who left them to fight among themselves for honor, and they washed, wrapped, and wept for the dead bodies that returned. They gave birth and cared for their children and cried when men hurled them from the city walls. Fathers traded their daughters to other men as wives, and they were passed on to yet more men as trafficked slaves. These are just facts, literary facts. But perhaps life for women in archaic Greece was not always as bleak as this. The Odyssey allows us to imagine a far more varied array of possible female lives. Its various settings and multiple different islands, homes, and palaces in peacetime rather than war are mostly places where women or goddesses have a defined position and a voice. Some scholars have tried to find buried memories in the Odyssey of an ancient pre-Greek matriarchal society. For example, in the peculiarly high status of Queen Arete in Phaeacia, who sometimes confusingly seems more important than her husband, or in Penelope's power in Ithaca over even the male members of her household, most prominently Telemachus. But these elements in the poem probably tell us more about male fears and fantasies, both ancient and modern, than about the historical realities of archaic or archaic women's lives. I don't have any problem with what she's saying there, but other people the hackles might go up. They might get a little bit triggered by the fact that she's bringing up gender and so forth. But it's in the text. Like, this stuff is there to be found and thought about. You don't have to agree with all of her interpretations of things. I'm not sure I do. Like, she speculates a little bit later in this introduction about Penelope, and like at what point in the book is she aware that this beggar is actually her husband, and she's not sure. She emphasizes the ambiguity of that, which I totally agree with. There's a lot of ambiguity there, but not everything she said in interpreting that, like not all the clues that she's reading are necessarily things that I would totally agree with. And yet, on the balance, I have no issues with this introduction. It raised a lot of food for thought. there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with like looking through a lens, the lens of our society and culture, looking back, trying to understand what this ancient text is telling us. What can we take from it? What do we see? As long as you keep things in perspective, where is our problem? And there's no doubt about it. There are just tons of great female characters in this book. We'll start with Penelope. There's Circe, there's Calypso. Like there's just a lot to chew on here, a lot to think about. But yeah, there's a lot in here about that. There's a section on becoming a man, so the theme of Telemachus, the boy who's growing up, coming of age, becoming a man. She talks about that. There's a section here about slaves. So again, she's just paying attention to what's in the text. You have a lot of slaves, workers in there. We can think about how they're treated. The same goes with Odysseus, who has to, when he gets to the shores of Ithaca, finally, at last, he comes in the guise of a beggar. And he's mistreated. He's bullied by the suitors. Not everyone treats him very well, and other people do. So it's in there to be thought about. Again, I don't see what the issue is at all. There's a section on hated Odysseus, which kind of gets into how Odysseus is an imperfect guy. She calls him a complicated man in the prologue, and he's crafty, he's wily, he lies a lot, and sometimes maybe not the most responsible leader. I mean, he's the only one who survives. Everyone else he tried to come back home with dies, drowned at sea or swallowed up by a monster, and so forth. And also the choice that he makes at the beginning of the epic, where he's been on the island with Calypso for years as like kind of like the slave lover boy of her. And Wilson talks about how Odysseus decides that he wants to leave all that behind and come home, and how maybe it isn't ever like completely explained why he wants to leave this pretty good situation he's got with her to go back to his wife in Ithaca. I mean, I think it sort of is obvious why he wants to come back home, but she reflects on that and has some interpretations. And then she gets into a little bit of reception history as well, and that essentially finishes her intro. She adds another little subchapter about her translation moves. So let me talk about that, because this has been somewhat controversial, I think. And she talks about meter a little bit here, style. In planning to translate the poem into English, my first thoughts were of style. The original is written in a highly rhythmical form of verse. It reads nothing like prose and nothing like any spoken or non-poetic kinds of discourse. Many modern poets in the Anglo-American tradition write free verse, and modern British and American readers are not usually accustomed to reading long narratives with a regular metrical beat, except for earlier literature like Shakespeare. Most contemporary translators of Homer have not attempted to create anything like a regular line beat, though they often lay out their text as if it were verse. But the Odyssey is a poem, and it needs to have a predictable and distinctive rhythm that can be easily heard when the text is read out loud. The original is in 6-footed lines, dactylic hexameters, a meter that is not used much at all in English verse. The conventional meter from archaic Greek narrative verse. That's what the Greeks used, 6-foot lines. I used iambic pentameter because it is the conventional meter for regular English narrative verse. It's the rhythm of Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton, Byron, Keats, and plenty of more recent Anglophone poets. I've spent many hours reading aloud both the Greek original and my own work in progress. Homer's music is quite different from mine, but my translation sings to its own regular and distinctive beat. So what she's saying there is, I felt like I had to write it in verse, and iambic pentameter was the logical choice. It is, by the way, blank verse iambic pentameter was the meter used by Milton in Paradise Lost. So there's all kinds of reasons to do it, and it comes very naturally to English poets. English is an iambic language when it's read aloud, spoken aloud. It just tends to be iambic. And she wanted it to have a distinctive beat. So that's why she tried to write it in meter. I mean, is there anything wrong with that? This also stuck out at me. She says, my version is the same length as the original with exactly the same number of lines. Wow, that's interesting. I chose to write within this difficult constraint because any translation without such limitations will tend to be longer than the original. I wanted a narrative pace that could match its stride to Homer's nimble gallop. Okay, so possibly, again, I can't confirm this because I don't read Homer in ancient Greek, but same number of lines, and also she's trying to replicate the rhythmical gallop of Homer's pacing. So when I said at the outset of this review that the Emily Wilson translation like really moves along, it's fast paced, that must be true for Homer too, unless Emily Wilson is lying, which I don't think she is. She's also writing in different registers, trying to convey different matters of style. I think maybe she's a little less successful at this. There were a few clunker lines here and there, what things sounded anachronistic or just sort of reverse anachronism. And but those were few and far between. I didn't have a huge amount of issue. I sort of see what she's striving for there. And then the issue of archaism is something that she takes up directly on page 87. All modern translations of ancient texts exist in a time, a place, and a language that are entirely alien from those of the original. That's just a fact. All modern translations are equally modern. The question facing translators and their readers is whether to try to disguise this fact through stylistic tricks, such as archaism and an elevated artificially literary register, or to underline it and thereby encourage readers to be aware that the text exists in two different temporal and spatial moments at once. I have tried to make my translations sound markedly poetic and sometimes linguistically distinctive, even odd, but I have also aimed for a fresh and contemporary register. That's what I think she does the best. The shock of encountering an ancient author speaking in largely recognizable language can make him seem more strange and newly strange. I would like to invite readers to experience a sense of connection to this ancient text, while also recognizing its vast distance from our own place and time. Homer is and is not our contemporary. Now, you could quibble with that. You could say I could see a translator putting up a good argument for injecting some flourishes and archaisms, elevate the style a little bit, ornament it a little bit, because maybe they want to make it seem distant, because it is distant, right? And as long as you're being faithful to the letter and spirit of the original, I would be okay with that too, to some degree. But I guess you can overdo that. And that's what she's trying to compensate for. I think she streamlines it a little bit. So it is not as, quote, poetic a translation as probably many other translations, but it is very well paced. It was easy to read, rich, and it had a lot of emotional high points. So I want to finish this review by reading a passage at the end of the Odyssey, near the end, where after Odysseus has slain the suitors, he's now reuniting with his wife, Penelope. Let's hear her translation for a page or two. And this is in book 23. Odysseus has just been cleaned up. He's washed, and he's back to looking like Odysseus. So, Penelope should recognize him with open arms at this point. But not just yet. So let's just start here. Page 500. After his bath, he, that's Odysseus, looked like an immortal. He sat down in the same chair opposite his wife and said, "Extraordinary woman, the gods have given you the hardest heart. No other wife would so reject a husband who had been suffering for 20 years and finally come home. Well, Nanny, make a bed for me so I can rest. This woman must have an iron heart. Penelope said shrewdly, You, extraordinary man, I am not acting proud or underplaying this big event, yet I am not surprised at how you look. You looked like this the day your long oars sailed away from Ithaca. Now, Euryclea, make the bed for him outside the room he built himself. Pull out the bedstead and spread quilts and blankets on it. She spoke to test him, and Odysseus was furious and told his loyal wife, Woman, your words have cut my heart. Who moved my bed? It would be difficult for even a master craftsman, though a god could do it with ease. No man, however young and strong, could pry it out. There is a trick to how this bed was made. I made it, no one else. Inside the court there grew an olive tree with delicate long leaves, full-grown and green, as sturdy as a pillar, and I built the room around it. I packed stones together and fixed a roof and fitted doors. At last I trimmed the olive tree and used my bronze to cut the branches off from root to tip and planed it down and skillfully transformed the trunk into a bedpost. With a drill, I bored right through it. This was my first bedpost, and then I made the other three inlaid with gold and silver and with ivory. I stretched ox leather straps across, dyed purple. Now I have told the secret trick, the token. But woman, wife, I do not know if someone, a man, has cut the olive trunk and moved my bed, or if it is still safe. At that, her heart and body suddenly relaxed. She recognized the tokens he had shown her. She burst out crying and ran straight towards him and threw her arms around him, kissed his face, and said, Do not be angry at me now, Odysseus. In every other way, you are a very understanding man. The gods have made us suffer. They refuse to let us stay together and enjoy our youth until we reach the edge of age together. Please forgive me. Do not keep bearing a grudge, because when I first saw you, I would not welcome you immediately. I felt a constant dread that some bad man would fool me with his lies. There are so many dishonest, clever men. That foreigner would never have got Helen into bed if she had known the Greeks would march to war and bring her home again. It was a goddess who made her do it, putting in her heart the passion that first caused my grief as well. Now you have told the story of our bed, the secret that no other mortal knows, except yourself and me, and just one slave, Actorus, whom my father gave to me when I came here, who used to guard our room. You made my stubborn heart believe in you. This made him want to cry. He held his love, his faithful wife, and wept. As welcome as the land to swimmers when Poseidon wrecks their ship at sea and breaks it with great waves and driving winds. A few escape the sea and reach the shore, their skin all caked with brine. Grateful to be alive, they crawl to land. So glad she was to see her own dear husband, and her white arms would not let go his neck. They would have wept until the rosy dawn began to touch the sky. But shining-eyed Athena intervened. She held night back, restraining golden dawn beside the ocean, and would not let her yoke her swift young colts, shining and bright. Odysseus, mind whirling, said, Wife, we have not come yet to the end of all our troubles. There are more to come, many hard labors which I must complete. The spirit of Tiresias informed me that day I went inside the house of Hades to ask about the journey home for me and for my men. But come now, let us go to bed together, wife. Let us enjoy the pleasure of sweet sleep. A fine, fine translation of the Odyssey. Nothing to be afraid of here, trust me. It's a really, really good read. I liked it. In a week's time, I'm going to be going to see the Odyssey film. We have our tickets reserved. The next Friday, I'll be watching that. I'm looking forward to it. Reviews seem to be pretty good, but I'm taking those with a grain of salt. I got to see it for myself. but it should be fun. If it sounds like it's going to be a fun summer blockbuster, and if I'm not mistaken, I think it's kind of based on the Emily Wilson translation. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think I read that somewhere. But regardless, the Odyssey is just one of the greatest epics. Every time I reread it, I like it more. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little deep dive into the Emily Wilson translation, and we'll talk to you again soon. Be well. Peace out.